Debate, the Honourable Member for New Westminster Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll be sharing my time with the Honourable Member from Châteauguay, Saint-Constant. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the House to address today's NDP motion calling on the government to formally recognize the existence of a standalone covenant of moral, social, legal, and fiduciary obligation between the Canadian people and the Government of Canada to provide equitable financial compensation and support services to past and active members of the armed forces who have been injured, disabled, or have died as a result of military service, and to their dependents. Canada's New Democrats recognize this social covenant as the foundation of a respectful relationship between our government and our veterans. When the Conservatives deny this sacred obligation, they undermine the relationship with those who have fought for all of us. We call on all parliamentarians to stand up for veterans by supporting this motion. To begin, I would like to thank my honourable colleague from Sackville Eastern Shore for the tremendous work he has done and continues to do on behalf of Canada's veterans and their families. His tireless efforts championing the needs of our brave men and women are unrivaled and deserve recognition of all members of this House. Our country has a long history of standing up for the rights and freedoms Canadians hold dear. The men and women who join the Canadian Forces know they may be called upon to risk their lives on behalf of Canada to uphold peace, security, or human rights here at home and around the world. For those who answer the call, we honor their service and are grateful for their personal sacrifices, including those sacrifices made by their families. The social covenant with veterans was first openly recognized in our country by Prime Minister Robert Borden in 1917. He said, quote, "The government and the country will consider it their first duty to see that a proper appreciation of your effort and your courage is brought to the notice of people at home, that no man, whether he goes back or whether he remains in Flanders, will have just cause to reproach the government for having broken faith with the men who have won and men who died," unquote. This historic covenant acknowledges that our nation and its government and citizens will support our men and women in their missions, honor their service, and look after them and their families when injured, disabled, or die in the service of our country. New Democrats recognize the covenant between the Canadian people and the government to provide equitable financial compensation and support services to past and active members of the Canadian Forces who have been disabled or have died as a result of military service, and to their dependents, which in turn the government is obligated to fulfill. Yet rather than recognizing the covenant, this Conservative government continues to do damage control rather than live up to their obligation to veterans. They have made piecemeal funding announcements that only apply to a limited number of permanently injured veterans, while so many more remain unserved. While all parties voted for the new Veterans Charter in 2005, the Conservatives have implemented it in a way that denies essential pension and support services that veterans deserve. In response, the veterans group Equitas is suing the government, claiming this change in benefits violates the covenant that exists between the government and veterans. Shockingly, the government's own lawyers claim no such covenant exists, despite modern legislative and constitutional legal precedent otherwise. Let me quote directly from Equitas' statement of claim against the government, as I believe it lays out the foundation for why formal recognition of the sacred covenant is so important. And it says, quote, "When members of the Canadian Forces put on their uniform of their country, they make an extraordinary personal commitment to place the welfare of others ahead of their personal interests, to serve Canada before self, and to put themselves at risk as required in the interests of the nation. A veteran, whether regular or reserve, retired or active, is someone who at one point in their life wrote a blank check made payable to the Government of Canada for an amount of up to and including their life." Unquote. Military experts and veterans advocates agree with New Democrats that the government must honor its moral, social, legal, and fiduciary obligation to Canada's veterans and their families. For instance, the Royal Canadian Legion, representing more than 300,000 members, quote, "firmly believes this country has a solemn obligation owed to our military members," unquote, and that, quote, "the Veterans' Bill of Rights must be included in the new Veterans Charter and in the Pension Act, and that a modified version of Section 2 of the Pension Act be incorporated into the new Veterans Charter and read as follows. The provisions of this Act shall be liberally construed and interpreted to the end that they recognize solemn obligation of the people and Government of Canada to provide compensation to those members of the forces who have been disabled or have died as a result of military service and to their dependents may be fulfilled," unquote. Further, when asked at the Veterans Affairs Committee whether he believes the government has an obligation, or she believes an obligation to honor the sacred social covenant, Dr. Stephanie Belanger of Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research testified, quote, "There is a social covenant. There is lots of evidence of that social covenant existing in every country where the government will task people with a clause of unlimited liability, and because of this clause there is an obligation to serve back," unquote. Tragically, in spite of the compelling case made by veterans advocates, after 9 years of Conservative government, too many veterans and their families still cannot access adequate health care, pensions, and vital supports. $1.13 billion of Veteran Affairs budgets has been returned to the Federal Treasury since 2006. Over $1 billion, Mr. Speaker. That is shocking. This money that should have gone towards improved benefits and services for veterans and their families. Veterans and their families are dealing with the closure of 9 frontline Veterans Affairs offices and reduction of more than 900 jobs from Veteran Affairs since 2009, amounting to 23% of the department's workforce. That's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Canadian Forces veterans and their families deserve our deepest gratitude and deserve to be taken care of. Injured and disabled veterans should not have to fight the government in court for the compensation and care they rightly deserve. Canadians expect parliamentarians to ensure our veterans and their families are well cared for from the moment they sign up to the moment they pay the ultimate sacrifice, including a dignified funeral and burial. If the Conservatives are serious about improving veterans' care, they will stop fighting veterans in court and recognize this historic social covenant to provide comprehensive and compassionate care for the brave men and women who have served on our behalf. They would also not have hastily included the entirety of Bill C-58 into their latest Budget Implementation Act in a cynical move to force the opposition to vote against legislation it would support if it was presented as a standalone bill. And, Mr. Speaker, we would have attempted to improve it on behalf of veterans and their families. This move underscores the political games the Conservatives are playing with veterans' issues, and it is exactly why today's motion is so important. It is Canada's New Democrats who have led the way on proposals to improve the programs and services available for veterans and their families. An NDP government will end service pension clawbacks. We will reopen shuttered Veterans Affairs offices. And we will widen access to quality home care, long-term care, and mental health care services. Today we repeat the call for the government to repair our country's relationship with our veterans to one that is based on respect rather than neglect by supporting our motion to recognize this sacred social covenant and taking immediate action to enshrine it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for